be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, college athlete, Army Ranger, and Spartan champion and athlete, Mark Gaudet. Mark, thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
I'm excited. So actually, while preparing for this conversation, I came across an interesting tidbit. And in light of recent events with the NBA Finals, I've got to ask, what was it like squaring off with Steph Curry?
Oh, yeah, that's funny. No, it was pretty cool. It was, I think it was my junior year in college. So Steph was only a freshman, and we went down to Davidson. They worked us over pretty good, beat us by about 27. But I think, we stuck around for the first half. And I think that season we held Steph to like his lowest like shooting percentage all year, which is kind of funny because he still hit like 7 or 8 threes against us. He just happened to take like 28.
He went for 29. That's what I saw, which I thought was hilarious. And he did come off the bench. So that makes sense that it was his freshman year.
Yeah, but you could tell immediately that this kid had something special at the time, and just the confidence that he played with as a 18-year-old freshman. The kid was firing from 10 feet out, and you just had to respect that in his game, even that early on. So I mean, we picked him up pretty much full court, and you just had to account for him wherever he was on the court, and he'll make you pay if you lose him for 1 second. And I mean, he's still doing that today, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that was actually one of my questions is was there something that stood out about him then that you were like, man, that guy's going to be special? Because I had an opportunity when I was 6th grade. I played against LeBron, who was in 5th grade, and everyone was like, yeah, this guy's going to be something special. And that was even before he was tall. He was just the same height as everybody else. So was that the same for you with Steph?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of us saw him, being one of the top, 15, 20 greatest players of all time. But I mean, we thought he was going to be a special college player and be a good NBA player at the time. But yeah, I think what made him special was, I was a shooter too, but I'm probably not ever taking 25 plus 3-pointers in a game. And that's even if I'm like sticking them all. And he was kind of off that night, and he just continued to shoot, like nothing faced him. And I think that's what makes him so great.
Oh, absolutely. So I want to transition a little bit now to you, because what I think is very interesting, you've done an amazing number of hard things. So when you hear somebody come up and they say, or you hear for the first time somebody say, I can't, what does that mean to you? What does that say to you?
I mean, it probably just is an example of someone who hasn't, really found their ceiling yet. I think that's really what that shows to me. I mean, there are things that I didn't think were possible for me early on in my career as an athlete and as a soldier, that as I just continued to do harder things and challenge myself, my goals continued to just get bigger and bigger. And I think kind of my rise in the sport of obstacle racing is a great example of that.
So tell me about that story. Is there something that happened in that event that you were like, man, you know what? Maybe I could do more of this.
Right. So I competed in the Army's best ranger competition 4 times. So that is a 62 plus hour event that just is continuous, no sleep programmed. And you cover upwards to 75, 85 miles, most of that with a ruck on your back. And it's a pretty brutal event. And I had done that 4 times earlier in my career. And one of the events in the best ranger competition happened to be a Spartan race, 2 of the years, my last 2 years. And one of the athletes competing was a former Spartan world champion, and he was a National Guard soldier. So in his real life, he was a professional athlete, endurance athlete, and then he also, served in the National Guard, which allowed him to compete in this competition. And one year during that Spartan event, I was going head to head. My partner and I were going head to head against him and his teammate. And I remember I picked up an Atlas stone and I went by him on the course, and it like clicked in my head, like I could be a Spartan world champion, like right then. And I talked to him after the race, and he's like, you should definitely get into this if you ever have the opportunity. And at that time in the Army, I was just so busy with deployments and training that I never really had the time to train or compete in these events. And then I landed a job at the Pentagon, and it was going to give me 3 to 4 years to really figure out how good I could be at this. And I thought I was going to show up day one and be a contender. And that wasn't the case at all. And I showed up to a big event. It was the North American Championships in West Virginia, one of my first events. And I just got humbled big time. And I finished, I think 22nd. A very deep field, but I thought I was going to be in contention for the podium. And I wasn't even like in the conversation, even from the first 5 minutes of the race. And I remember when I finished, I was like, man, maybe I'm not, as talented as I thought I was.
So I'm curious, do you think that being humbled like that is a key to future success? Oh, Mark, I think I lost you here.
I kind of had those thoughts of I can't as well. But I just kept pushing, and those goals kept getting loftier and loftier.
So I lost you there for a minute. I think it cut out. I'm not sure what all I missed, but I'm curious. I'm going to reframe back because you were talking about being humbled, and I'm wondering how much being humbled made an impact on your future growth and success.
I think it really, I'd say mainly it focused me. It really made me realize that this wasn't going to be, put in a few workouts a week. I really had to go all in and fully dedicate myself, not just in the training, but it was going to be in like all areas. My sleep, I was going to have to prioritize. I was going to have to prioritize nutrition. And I was going to have to go all in if I even wanted to, even contend. So I think it just really focused me, and I was just committed to finding out how good I could be.
So interesting thought with that is, do you think that had you not been tested out the gate, you would have committed yourself as deeply? Or is that something that you have always been, just ultra competitive, ultra driven, ultra focused? Is that you?
I think it is me. I'm just a very hyper competitive person. And I'm not if I'm going to do something, I'm going to be all in. But I think this like brought me to a different level. Like, I think I always would have been competitive and never accepting just being mediocre in the sport. But this was a matter of, if I even want to just, not embarrass myself out there, this is the level of depth I have to go into this training.
I love that. And I love the idea of being ultra competitive, because I think too many people shy away from the competitiveness that's necessary to be successful. So who is your rival in the Spartan racing community?
I think, it's definitely a friendly rivalry, but we always get thrown in the same sentence, and it's Robert Killian is, a great friend of mine. We see each other monthly. We train together. pull for each other, but we have like very similar backgrounds, both being out of the military. He's a world champion. And I think we always get thrown in the same sentence, and I'm just like a few years younger than him. So I think it's a good, healthy rivalry. And I think it pushes us, even as we get upwards of 40 years old, to continue to push each other so we can stay at the top of the sport.
Oh yeah. I do agree that having that friendly rivalry, having that competition, having those people who know, if you don't show up with your best, they're going to beat you. It makes you that much more prepared, that much more ready to go.
Absolutely.
So with all that in mind, what's the hardest thing you've ever done?
I still think probably the first year I did the best ranger competition, just because my body and my mind had never been there before. And I think that doing that 4 consecutive years, I think it got progressively easier each year, not because I was in any better shape, but because I had, really conditioned my mind, and I kind of knew what to expect. And I knew like, hey, I pushed this hard last time, like I can go further. And each year my body and my mind just adapted. But I think the first year of that, I felt sorry for myself, especially the second night without sleep and just blisters all over my feet. It was just, there was a lot of, tiny heart syndrome, as we like to say in the Army. I was feeling sorry for myself. I think that's probably the hardest event I've been a part of.
And you chose to go back and do it 3 more times?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Cause, I wasn't content with the first year. My partner and I came strong out of the gates. He'd competed multiple times before, and we led early in day 1. And then it was just this fall from grace over the next 2 days that we landed in 15th place that year. We finished, which only, about half the teams finished that event. But I was like, I can do better. And we came back in the next 3 years, had 3 strong finishes. But I still haven't won that event. And if I ever have the opportunity, I'd do it again.
Yeah, I heard they closed it down now. You can't do it anymore. It's people like you doing it too often.
Yeah, I guess so. There's a few too many people who were becoming professional best ranger competitors, which I was one of the few who competed, and I was still in command. So I was in position. So I didn't have any special duty or special time that was dedicated to training. I did my job from 6 a.m. to 6 o'clock at night most days, and then I found time to train after work with my partner and on the weekends. But there were other people who were pulled from their jobs, spent 12 hours a day training for up to 6 months ahead of that event, and aren't really bringing a whole lot to the Army. So I think it is a good move to kind of like, there's some guys, I think it was the 7th year competing before he won, but that's 7 years that you're not contributing a whole lot to the Army.
No, that makes sense. With all these things, you've mentioned the mindset and developing this strength, both physically and mentally. Where do you take your mind when you know you have something hard that you're about to do?
I think I try to embrace it. I think too many times we try to zone out, which I think it's possible for certain events, but when you start going like multiple days or a 24-hour event, you just can't zone out. There's too much going on, and especially in a 24-hour Spartan race, like there's so many other things that you need to be concentrating on, and if you lose focus, you're gonna lose it right there. So like I try to embrace it and just fully acknowledge it, and then like let it go. So if I've got my knees 20 hours in a race just feel like they've been hit with a sledgehammer, and I just don't really feel like running anymore, I just acknowledge like, hey, that's there, and I internalize it, and I said, it's not going away, so just learn to live with it, and I just keep moving. But I think ignoring it doesn't really work.
Have you always acknowledged it, or is that something that you've picked up over time?
I think it's something I've picked up over time. It is one of the skills that working with some of the sports psychologists over the years is good. Is it, acknowledging it internalizing it and then letting it go and not dwelling on it is one of them. And I think there's a lot of especially in like an event like Best Ranger, where it's event on top of event, is having the ability to like move past whether it's mistakes or getting passed by someone in a race after 20 hours or something, and not letting that completely destroy your race, like staying engaged and fighting back, and not giving in, which is so easy to do when you're just so mentally and physically fatigued.
There's something that's really interesting when I talk to an endurance athlete, and it's these commonalities to life. The adversity you're going to face, the not knowing what's going to come next, the getting humbled and set back and thinking that you're at a certain level, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm just not even close yet. What has doing so many mentally and physically challenging things in your life taught you about yourself?
I mean, I think it just has provided perspective for me. And I lean on those experiences in all, aspects of my life. I think back of, something's going rough at work. I think back to some of my lowest moments in racing, where I'm like, okay, this isn't that bad. And then I've noticed that I have to continue to do hard things. Because if I let myself go, it's harder to lean on those previous experiences. So like, my most recent 24-hour event was back in September. And I've used the suffering from that event in a lot of different races this year. And just, I try to tell myself, as bad as this feels, like at least this isn't going 24 hours. This is a 1 hour race, or this is a 2 hour race. And I think it's just taught me that I can build even more resiliency in my own life. And then I think it just provides the perspective that helps across my entire life.
Do you think there's anything you can't do?
I mean, I think there are limits, clearly limits. I don't think I'm going to play in the NBA at this point. But I think in the endurance realm, like, I don't think I've met my ceiling even at 36 years old. And I'm really eager to find out what else I can do. So I'm not willing to like cap my PR in a marathon or ultra marathon quite yet, because I think there's so much more. And what gives me hope is seeing so many great athletes do things well into their 40s now, which wasn't the case, 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, no, I definitely see a lot more athletes carrying their success longer because of the nutrition and the recovery and the exercise piece. After one of those events, what do you do to recover? What's your recovery regimen look like?
So I have a pretty robust recovery regimen, and it's a lot of vitamins, minerals, supplements. And I'm pretty, like, guys will see, like, right when I hit the finish line, like, I've got stuff waiting. So those are things that I prepared long before the race. They're like waiting to put into my body. And a lot of it's just like things to rejuvenate, that soft tissue damage that I've done, like limit the inflammation in my joints and everything. Just because I know if I do, in those first 30 minutes after the finish, if I do the right things, I'm going to be back training, a day or two earlier at a much higher quality. So there's some supplementation like right at the finish. And then I'm big into cooling down and not sitting down really, like in the first hour. So even after a 24-hour event where I was just completely demolished, like I didn't feel like running anymore, but I continued to move and walk. And a lot of guys just sit down in a chair and they're just demolished. And so continuing to move. And then I've got, a couple of sponsors with Firefly Recovery, just a device that I put on the sides of my legs that increases blood flow to my lower legs. And then I've just got some different boots that, your Normatex or some of the others that pump the lactic acid out of your legs and so I hit all of those things post race. And then I just really prioritize sleep and getting good calories in over the next 24, 48 hours after a big effort like that.
How often do you reflect on the performance?
I think I'm pretty good at reflecting for the remainder of that day. So I give myself, I definitely am pretty hard on my performance. But I try to turn a new page the next day and just look forward to the next one and try not to dwell on it, whether it's good or bad. Because there's so much in this sport, like other sport, that's like, like, what have you done for me lately? And no one really cares about, even 2 races ago, if you laid an egg the last one, all of a sudden you're finding yourself like out of everyone's prediction chart, like this guy, okay, he's washed up, he's done. And so, I'm always, laser focused to that next event. Once I give myself, a good maybe 6-12 hours to kind of pick my race apart, find out the areas that I was weak, so I can really dial those into my next training block.
What's the hardest part of doing an obstacle course race for you? Is it the distance, the actual obstacles, a strength application? I'm not 100% familiar with that realm. So what are the things that are most taxing throughout that event for you?
For me, I think I'm one of the stronger runners in the sport, just pure runners. And with my military background, I do well on a lot of like the carries, sandbag carry, bucket carry, log carries, things like that. I just take like a lot of grit. I do well. For me, I'm not like I'm not a ninja warrior like a lot of these guys who just like float through obstacles. So I would say compared to the top tier athlete in the sport, I'm weaker on a lot of the obstacles. I can get through them, no problem. Like I will make it through, and I'm not going to fail many, but some of these guys like float right through them, and they have the ability to recover on a lot of these grip intensive obstacles. Whereas I feel like it zaps me more than running. So I think that's a weakness of mine comparatively. And then just from a lot of the injuries I suffered in college on my ankles and feet, I'm not the strongest descender. So like really technical terrain, flying down like, double black diamond ski resort trails, just with like rocks everywhere. I'm not very strong. Some guys can just like fly down the mountain. I definitely lose time to those guys on those events, but I'm a strong climber. And I try to make up for it there. Just get to the top faster to give myself a little room for them to come screaming past me.
How much of the race do you know as far as the layout, the obstacles? Is it all determined, like you're going to face these obstacles at different checkpoints?
So generally, the Thursday of a Saturday race is when they release the course map. But generally, the bigger race brands, they have their menu of obstacles that they'll just roll out a different array of obstacles for each course. So I've seen just about all of them. I'm not surprised very often. But they're just like super creative of how they throw them at you. Like it'll be like grip intensive obstacle on top of grip intensive obstacle. So they just get harder. And then they're very good at like putting something very strenuous, like right at the top of a very big climb. So you get to the top and then there's something that's very difficult. Like you run a mile up like a ski run. And then right when you get to the top, you have to pick up a sandbag and take it like halfway back down and back up again. And they'll do things like put you in water before some of the difficult grip of hanging events, like a rig or something. So your hands are wet, trying to get through it just makes it harder. But yeah, there's not a whole lot that surprises me at this point after a few years in the sport.
So with all of that and you get to know what's going on, how much does your self-awareness of your strengths and weaknesses play into your strategy?
Oh, that's a great question. It definitely does. I take a look at the obstacle laydown, and oftentimes because of the terrain, the most obstacle dense area happens to be either right at the beginning or right at the end. Right, like a festival area. Think like right at like a ski resort at the bottom of the lift where you got like the flat ground by the lodge and everything. Oftentimes that's what it looks like, and then the course is like up and down the mountain. So not a lot of room for obstacles. So for me, knowing that oftentimes I know I've got to build that lead early in the race so I can hold off those guys who are just like insanely strong on the obstacles at the end. So that it definitely plays into it. And then you kind of look at the obstacles that require a little bit more focus and exertion to get through. And I generally, might run a little back off a little bit going into them just to make sure I get through it and don't put myself on a penalty loop or whatever the penalty may be for failing something. So I definitely take those things into consideration.
Yeah, I saw that you had a recent race where you ran and then you flew home and then ran again. And one of the things you were talking about was the penalty loop. So talk to me, first off, the penalty loop system, how does that work? And then I'll ask you the other one here after you answer that.
Yeah, so the most common, I guess, penalty in obstacle racing is if you fail an obstacle is in Spartan, it's the burpee. So 30 burpees, which is pretty time consuming. It could be about 90 seconds, but it just gasses you, which is the worst part by far. So it really affects the remainder of your race. But Spartan also uses penalty loops, and a lot of the other race brands use that as well. And you fail an obstacle, they're just going to send you on like a quarter mile, sometimes like up to like a half mile, depending on the length of the race. Penalty loop that will basically send you off to the side. It'll bring you around and puts you on the backside of that obstacle. So it's just your penalty for failing. And in the race in Mexico, there's definitely a language barrier. There were instructions given to us in Spanish and then in English. And we were told that it was a multiple attempt obstacle because there's a 10-foot wall. And it was an obstacle that we don't see in America. And so there's a little bit of technique there. Most guys aren't going to be able to just straight jump to the top of a 10-foot wall on like uneven grassy terrain. So you've got to be able to like jump, stick your foot into the wall, and then get up to the top. And early on in that race, about 3 miles into a 14+ mile race, was the 10-foot wall. And as I came up to it, there's only a few people ahead of me at the time, and I watched a couple of them were making multiple attempts on it. And I came up in my first run. I just didn't get a good run up to it, and I kind of like aborted mid jump. So I just kind of jumped and like hit my foot into the wall and then pushed back. And I started backing up to go again, and the official came in front of me and one of the other Americans and was like, told us like, uno, like one attempt. And everyone behind him is continuing to attempt, some of them getting over the wall. And he's got like hands up in front of both of us, so we can't even go around him. And he's like pointing us. So we're just like, hey, we gotta take this. So we took the penalty loop, which was like a crawl under some barbed wire for a while. And then you get up and you had to run probably a third of a mile and then crawl back under barbed wire to get on the other side of that wall. And so it set us back over 3 minutes, like early in the race, which against professional athletes, like that sets you back pretty far. So that at that point, my mindset in that race completely changed. I was very comfortable. I just knew I could wear down the field with my endurance. And after that, there's no time to be composed anymore. It's like time to get, show some, show some speed and show some grit and start working my way back in. So I had to really start pushing a lot harder in that race than I wanted to. And in a field that strong, you're not gonna win with any type of penalty.
And then you flew home and ran another race the next day. Is that right?
I did. Yeah. So that race was 8:00 in Puebla, Mexico. So about 3 hours east of Mexico City. So right after the race, it was a 2+ hour race. Jumped right in the car. We drove back to Mexico City Airport, flew into Dallas, had a little bit of a layover, and then flew into Colorado Springs, landed about 1 a.m. And then drove home, got into bed about 2, and then got up at 4:30 to get my pre-race routine going, and I was back on the starting line at 7:30 at the Spartan race in Colorado Springs.
What is it about doing hard things that you're so drawn to, that you would be willing to do a race in Mexico and then fly home, get home at the butt crack of dawn, and then get up and then go race another race?
I mean, I think these are the type of experiences that pay off in those World Championship 24-hour races. That doing things when your body and your mind really don't want to do them. And I got home, I was pretty sore from that. That was a challenging race in Mexico. It was all at over 9,000 feet elevation, and it was 14 and a half miles, and they just threw in some pretty long carries, and I was pretty beat up. And when I got home, I was like, I really don't want to wake up in a couple hours and do this. But I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make myself do it, because this is gonna pay off down the road in a few months. And it also gave me an opportunity after, finishing outside of where I wanted to be. I was like, I get right back on that horse, get right back out there and get a W. And I was able to, get the win on Sunday morning.
So you mentioned a couple things there, and one of the ones that stands out to me is that you didn't really want to. How do you lean into your discipline when it's something that you deep down want to, but you in the moment don't want to? How do you lean into your discipline in those moments?
Yeah, I think it's just a recognition that we're all inherently lazy or try to avoid, pain and discomfort. We all do it. And I think that's what just keeps us, it's like one of our things that keeps us, safe and healthy. But at the same time, if you want to be great at anything, you can't really, give in to that. And I learned over the last few years of discipline training is when I program out my training, usually I program out about a month. I don't allow myself to deviate from my workouts that I have planned. Even if my body and my mind aren't there, I will kind of adjust the intensity, but I don't let myself get away with, like, this morning was a 90-minute run. And I did a pretty difficult speed workout yesterday. And this morning I got up and I was like, I am not feeling this. I do not want to go out there. And I definitely planned on putting more mileage in. But this morning I went in and I did 90 minutes at a very comfortable pace. And that's one thing I think it's just worked out for me, is I just don't let myself, take today off just because I'm not, not feeling the workout or feeling great. I just hold myself accountable and just, adjust the intensity if I do feel a little overworked. Because I think it snowballs once you start letting yourself lose that accountability. You just start, I took yesterday off. Today I'll just, do whatever. And for me, that just doesn't work. Maybe I'm just lazier than the average person. So that's what I have to do.
No, I love that. I think that's a fantastic point, and I hope people recognize the fact that we all have these thoughts. It's what you choose to do when you have those thoughts, and you've made the choice that I'm going to do what I write down. I'm going to do what I have to do, and at the end of the day, we're going to see where everything stacks up, and I think that's awesome, and people can learn from that for sure. I want to shift gears just a little bit here. I want to know a little bit more about your military time. Obviously, the Rangers is a big thing. What led you that path after being a college athlete?
So coming out of high school, I had an interest in going to West Point. I wanted to play basketball there. There's service runs pretty deep in my family with my grandfathers during World War II. And I just really always admired that about them. But my parents, 2004 is when 2004, I was graduating high school, and, we're talking invasion of Iraq time frame. And so my parents were just, like, hey, we really want you to go to college, but what if you try, just like a regular college? So, I didn't didn't really apply to West Point. Decided to go to Colby College, but I kind of always had that in the back of my mind. Like I still want to do this. So I never gave up on that. And when I finished my 4 years of college, I kind of revisited again with my parents, and my parents, again, 2008, things aren't a whole lot better when you're talking Afghanistan at that point. And so my parents were like, well, what about, graduate school? And I was like, okay. So my parents really pushed me towards grad school. And when I got there, I just wasn't fulfilled. I was, I completed the summer term of a graduate program, was getting ready to start up in the fall, and my heart wasn't there. So I just was like, at this point, I'm 22 years old. I can kind of make decisions for myself. And I met with a recruiter. I was really open with my parents. And once I told my parents, like, this is what I want to do, they were, they've been 100% supportive ever since. But yeah, it was kind of always there from a young age. And then I kind of felt like, if I don't do this now as a 22, 23-year-old, I feel like 10 years from now, I'm going to regret it. So I just dropped right out of grad school and went to basic training all within like a month. It was pretty crazy.
And then your competitiveness led you to the Rangers. Is that the rest of the story there, or is there something more with that?
Yeah. So I remember telling my mom early on, I was like, I just want to get some, a little bit of experience in the military, do my 3.5-year contract, and then, apply that elsewhere, whether it's like 3-letter agency, but do something. Yeah. I just want to get that experience and, serve my country. And I was like, I'm not going to, I don't plan on being an infantry officer or like any of that. Well, I got there and, that competitive spirit kind of kicks in. And I kind of realized early on, I was like, if I'm going to be in the military, I want to do something that I can't do anywhere else. So, I could be an engineer. Well, I could be an engineer and, in the private sector. I could be an MP. Well, I could be a police officer here. Like, I'm going to do something I can't. Like infantry, there's no other branch or anything like that in the private sector. So I was like, well, I'm going to be an infantry officer. So I, went down that route, and on my first deployment to Afghanistan with a conventional army unit. So I was in the 101st Airborne Division. And on that deployment, we are just what you would think. We're patrolling for hours on end, and we're just going into areas we don't really know. We're kind of sticking our necks out there, seeing like, hey, is this place still bad? Yep, still bad. A lot of bad guys here. But I never felt like there was like any rhyme or reason to a lot of the the operations we were doing. It was just like a lot of patrolling for days and weeks on end, and just getting in some really gnarly areas. And then we might be there for like, focus on that for like a month, but then we're gone, and they just, return to that area again. So towards the end of that deployment, they assigned me as the battle space liaison officer. And what that meant was that the Rangers and the SEALs in that area, they would usually have to coordinate with like the conventional army unit in that area before they would do a raid to let them know, hey, we're coming into your area. And that conventional army unit would put their liaison on the aircraft with them. And then they would report back to their commander afterwards and be like, yeah, everything they did, lines with what they said, and kind of here's what we saw. And you can kind of, intel shared, bring some of that intelligence back to the conventional army unit. And they made me the LNO, and I went out on some operations with the Rangers and the SEALs on the back end of that deployment. And when I went out there with them, I was going into areas that I'd been 100 times. And I mean, I'm just like blown away with what I'm seeing. I'm like, wow, like we walk through here all the time. We don't have any issues. But these guys are like pulling these high value targets out of these areas who are just hiding right in front of our noses. And they're just doing it with such precision and skill. And then just all the enablers that are around them, whether it's the ISR, the drones in the aircraft in the sky, and the dog teams and the snipers and the mortars, and like just they had it all. And I was like, this is awesome. This is what I want to do. So when I came back, I immediately went to the assessment and was selected, and I was back there the same year, actually.
Oh, wow.
right back there I got back in August of that year. And then so I spent parts of 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 in Afghanistan. And just going, there for 110 days, back for 7 months. And it was honestly the most fulfilling period of my career. I guess professionally, it was the most developing. I learned the most about myself. I like developed as an officer, and it's really where I kind of honed my leadership skills, just doing those kind of high pressure type operations, surrounded by just the toughest, most skilled Rangers that we have, like in our force. And that's really what shaped me into the officer that I am today.
That's awesome. What do you feel is the most valuable thing you gained from your military experience?
I think the ability the ability to not have anything faze me. It's not a very eloquent way of putting that, but prior to the military, if I had a 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. flight, I started doing the math, and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have to wake up at 3. Like, that just seems crazy to me. And just the way the military does things, where you're just constantly doing things that are difficult and tough, you just learn to roll with the punches, and that nothing phases you. So like the last weekend, those back-to-back races, it's like, oh, that's nothing to me. That would have been something to me, 14 years ago, before I came to the Army. And I think it's just the repetition of those types of events that allow me to be more resilient and not allow those things just to not phase me the same way anymore.
That's awesome. And I think there's so much that the younger generation can learn from that, because things are going to happen outside of your control, and the ability to navigate those with poise and clarity of, this is what I'm supposed to do. I know that's happening over here, but I've got a job. I think it's just something that we can all get some huge benefits out of. And I think that's a great lesson for all of our kids and leaders and everyone who's listening to this, that's looking for how to handle the tough stuff.
Absolutely. And it's not something that just comes naturally to any of us. It's something that we have to work on, and we have to endure. And we have to, consciously seek opportunities to develop that resilience.
Oh yeah, for sure. So recently though, you've been on Capitol Hill, right? Doing stuff in DC. I want to hear, what was something that you learned during your time doing that?
I mean, being in an apolitical institution, like the Department of Defense, talk about a wild experience of getting thrown into the most politicized, part of the country, in DC, not only like working in the Pentagon, but then working on the Hill, suit and tie for the Army, and just being the trusted agent for the Army with 12 Senate offices. So I would liaise between 12 Senate offices. I had a good split of 1 independent, 6 Democrats, and 5 Republican offices. So I had a really good split. And it's just really cool to see the different ways that different leaders think about the same topic. So, I might go into a meeting and hear some more conservative people take an angle on an issue, and I'm like, wow, that's actually that makes a lot of sense. And then I go into a different meeting and hear like Democrats have a different take on it. I'm like, wow, that makes a lot of sense too. And it shows that there's nothing that's like black and white. And it's tough to thrown into that environment and have to like follow every move that 12 senators make. I told my wife, like, after a year of it, I was like, it's going to be good for me just to get off Twitter, because, I am, it's probably going to be good for my mental health to leave this job and do something different, because I was so invested and, immersed in that environment. And it's tough, but that's our job, is to remain apolitical and just report the facts. And it was a wild time to be there. I was there for, January 6th. It was crazy, but what an incredible learning opportunity for me.
I think it could be an incredible learning opportunity for a lot of people, because like you said, you hear somebody on the left say something and you're like, oh, that makes sense. And then you hear somebody on the right say something and you're like, oh, well, that also makes sense. I would imagine that if we did more of that and we showed more of that, we'd find ourselves closer to that middle where I believe we all live anyway. But as a leadership point, being able to communicate and hear and work between those different levels, I think only brings us further along as a country, as a community, as an organization that you're trying to work with people who have different thoughts and beliefs and backgrounds and stories. What was your experience like with that, from how you applied it to your leadership?
No, you're 100% about that. I think most of us, 90% of us, live in that middle ground and can see both sides. I think it's just a conscious decision for all of us to stay in that, that arena, which is tough to do in this day and age of social media. But yeah, I guess one thing that really stood out to me, which gave me a lot of hope, was working within all of these offices were just phenomenal people on both sides who are very rational. It's tough because a lot of things are said, there's a lot of political rhetoric and posturing that gets said in front of cameras, that gets on the airwaves. But behind the scenes, even a lot of the senators are very rational people who are extremely intelligent, and like being behind the scenes for a few of those engagements, it does give you hope that there's also strong groups of people on both sides who are just trying to do the best thing for the country, which is cool, because those staffs do, like any job, the staff do most of the work. And those people were just phenomenal people on both sides. So that kind of gave me hope, and they're just trying to keep this country, heading in the right direction. And I think that's one of the things that I took towards my leadership is, you're not always going to agree with what the direction your boss is trying to go. And it's like that balance of supporting your boss while actually, still doing the best for yourself and for your country. And I saw that on a daily basis with the staff. Like, everyone is extremely loyal and professional to their boss. However, they also had the courage to, in a lot of those venues, to stand up and tell them, like, I don't think this is right. And here's like an alternative that we can approach. So seeing that stuff right there made me kind of evaluate how I do things in my own job.
I love that. And it brings a lot of hope to hear you say that, because right now the things you see the most of doesn't give you much hope. So that's awesome to hear. I guess my next question is, are we going to see you more in a suit and tie, or are you going to go back into the normal military life after this?
Yeah, so I'm back. I left DC back in September, and out here in Colorado Springs now. So I'm at Fort Carson in Colorado in the 4th Infantry Division. And, after 3.5-4 years in DC, the Army told me it's time to go do like real Army stuff again. So I'm back on the grind, back being just an infantry officer. And it's cool. It's awesome being back with soldiers. But it's a tough transition. I had 3.5 to 4 years of, sleeping in a little bit, working out on my own in the morning, eating what I wanted, never going to the field, not deploying. And now I'm back where, it's 6:30 PT formation, just a whole host of issues that just come with having large formations of Army soldiers that you get to deal with on a daily basis. And then there's never really, it's not a 5 o'clock, head to the metro. Yeah. It's, you leave when the job is done, and then you're spending time in the field, working some weird reverse cycle hours, and it's tough to maintain fitness and then be a good father on top of all those things.
Well, speaking of father, I know Father's Day is coming up tomorrow, and so my final question before I send John your way is, I saw your post where your son Ryan thought your wife was 54, so I'm wondering what kind of surprises do you think are in store for you tomorrow?
Oh yeah, who knows with these three guys? Yeah, they're pretty crazy, but yeah, I think the coolest part of last weekend, despite the two races, was seeing those guys race the kids course. And I feel like the apple didn't fall too far from the tree with how my dad kind of raised me, because I was out on the course, just anytime they were feeling sorry for themselves, I would rip out my cell phone and take a video of them complaining or something. They would suck it up and keep running. And after the race, I'm giving them all the pointers, and it's fun to kind of see a little piece of yourself developing. And I think all three of these guys are going to be, better people and better athletes than I am.
That's all we can hope for, right? So that's the goal as a parent, is they end up better than we are. So
exactly.
Mark, I want to thank you so much for taking time to join me today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking and getting to hear your story. Where can some of my listeners follow what you're doing next, check in on your Spartan journey, or connect with you outside of here?
Yeah, so I think that probably the best these days is on Instagram. And my handle is Mark Gaudet 85. And I'm not that, depending on how busy I am at work, I'll post once or twice a week generally. But that's kind of really for my I'd say a little bit of military, but mostly like OCR and ultra running career on there. And then, Facebook is, I think we're kind of dinosaurs, all of us still on Facebook, but I'm still on there. So that's a decent spot. And then you can find me at some of the big upcoming races. I'm going to try to get up to Canada for the North American Championships for Spartan. I'm going to try to defend my title in Tahoe at the Spartan Ultra World Championships this year, and then trying to get into the Leadville 100 in August out here in Colorado. So those are kind of three of the big races I'm hoping the work will allow me to get into. But yeah, Charles, it's been a blast, and I appreciate you for having me on. And yeah, hope to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good luck in the upcoming races. Like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars. Fall flat on your face, but remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.